power of CBSV at a financial institution. This particular, it was a credit union, processed 79 applicants, and 10 of them were no match unsuccessful. That is a staggering 12.7% fraud rate. So significant loan losses, charge-offs at banks and credit unions from customers that were never tested against CBSV. Now, of course, I realize that not everyone on this call is a bank or a credit union or a mortgage lender. Maybe you're a retail business or a manufacturer. The same would apply, because people, unfortunately, are not all honest, law-abiding citizens. People try to scam the system. So they try to get a job with maybe their brother-in-law's social security number because of a number of different reasons, right? Here's another example. This particular company processed 93 individuals and found out that 17 were using a fake ID. That's a whopping 18% rate of applicants using a fraudulent ID, but they were caught by CBSV. Because other methodologies allow unauthorized applicants to slip through the cracks. But CBSV is more robust. So don't let this happen to you. In fact, I will go as far to say that there are companies represented on this call that have fraudulent workers on the books. CBSV must be used first on every applicant to mitigate fraud and reduce losses. In fact, CBSV is a great tool to use post-hire. So for those of you on this call that are wondering, or maybe you know that you have some fraudulent workers, how do you weed them out? Well, we're going to tell you how. It's CBSV. Now, I'm sure all of you are familiar with SSN trace products, credit header information. And of course, they have some usefulness. But when you compare CBSV to SSN trace, CBSV wins across the board because it validates personal identifiers right to the federal government, matching name, SSN, date of birth, and death indicator with applicant consent. And the beauty of CBSV is it's for all business purposes, as I mentioned, including post-hire, to ensure an authorized workforce. And by the way, some of you might think of other ways to utilize this service as well within your business. CBSV is virtually 100% accurate, and as you know, SSN trace is full of flaws and pollution. So the conclusion is SSN trace is inferior for personally identifiable information matching compared to CBSV. CBSV is the superlative personal identifier validation methodology. There's nothing better than CBSV to protect your business. And by the way, as some of you know, the feds are on the lookout. Enforcement has increased across multiple federal agencies. So are you using industry standard best practices? By the way, the SSA does not advertise this service. Unfortunately, although it's been around since 2002, it's incumbent upon us as agents, and of course Jerry's company as well, TruDiligence, to explain to you the value of this service. And that's what we're doing today, showing you how CBSV has grown through the years as we educate businesses nationwide. So class is now in session, as we like to say, and here's your Hiring 101 course. Step 1, CBSV. So you know the person is who they say they are before you hire them. Step 2, of course, Form I-9, employment eligibility at hire. And then if needed, or if it's mandatory in your state, E-Verify post-hire. But remember, CBSV can also be used post-hire. So what is CBSV? Well, it was developed and administered by the SSA. It's very robust because it matches name, SSN, date of birth, and death indicator to the master file and the federal government's death index. TruDiligence is doing this to strengthen, enhance, and purify your verification due diligence processes. So the result is a match, no match, or deceased. which of course is superlative PII matching for each applicant. Well, how can you use it? Of course, everyone on this call can use it on the HR side for background and employment screening. But there's also some on the call that will use it for other purposes, like their new applicants and accounts, or forensic accounting, claims adjusting, fraud investigations, auditing, licensing, permitting. As I mentioned earlier, creditors of all sorts, loan originations, depository accounts. Maybe there's someone on this call that does property management, or a college or a university or a hospital or a healthcare provider. All of these and more are legitimate uses of the service. And by the way, it is a premier compliance tool exceeding regulatory requirements. And we have a slide that will explain that for you too. So as you can see, any and all business purposes is how CBSV can be used. Now, if there are any hiring managers on this call, you know that the SSN has some shortcomings as a national identifier, because of course it would require universal legislation to develop and safeguard it. And most of you probably know that the numbering system was highly predictable until the feds randomized Social Security numbers beginning, well, it was 5 years ago, June of 2011. So now you get this applicant that comes to you and you no longer know the state of issuance, because the first 3 digits of the number used to indicate where that Social Security number was issued. That is no longer the case, as you know. And by the way, the Social Security cards do not contain any biometric identifiers. All that's on the card is a name and a 9-digit number. So of course now there's potential document fraud ahead, because the cards are not tamper-proof and there are over 3 versions of the card still usable. So isn't it easy for someone to just buy some card stock and mock up and make a fraudulent document on their home printer? Of course it is. And of course it's used for both ID and authentication purposes. So bottom line is the SSN was never intended to be, nor is it adequate to serve as a national identifier. In fact, Dennis Kelly, a certified ID expert, says that if you're not using CBSV, you're allowing up to 80% of preventable fraud. And he's right. In fact, the federal government backs him up with some numbers. The Office of the U.S. Inspector General reported that 5% of CBSV search results are no match unsuccessful. So now that's a national average. Now, I showed you 2 examples earlier of a 12.7% fraud rate and an 18% fraud rate. Obviously, those are well above the national average. But even 5% of people that are given this form are still trying to scam the system. So you have would-be thieves attempting to pass their fraudulent IDs through the CBSV system and obviously getting caught. So we estimate that the fraud percentage is higher for your company because you are not yet using CBSV. That's why I said earlier, you probably have workers in your system with fraudulent identities. What else do we know? Well, we know that the form itself, called the SSA 89 form, is a deterrent to identity thieves. How do we know? Well, we've been told many times. The first one was a gentleman that was applying for a job. He was given the form to sign, and he confessed on the spot to the potential employer that he was about to use someone else's SSN. So on the one hand, he was an honest crook, but on the other hand, he was really a crook. We also know that despite legislation, ID theft continues to increase. CBSV is the superlative matching validation methodology. We know that fraudulent applicants are extremely costly to U.S. businesses daily. And of course, this really is a national security issue. Some of you might be using E-Verify because you're in a mandatory E-Verify state. And of course, that's good. But CBSV really trumps E-Verify. Why? Well, CBSV is valid pre-employment. E-Verify is not. E-Verify is for post-hire use only on new applicants, of course, except federal contractors. So therefore, your CBSV results are known pre-hire, but with E-Verify, if that's what you're relying on, you have to hire the person, process E-Verify, find out they're unauthorized, terminate them. It's just a tremendous waste of time and money. CBSV, as you know, is now used for any business purpose, but E-Verify is very narrow. CBSV can be used on existing employees to ensure an authorized workforce. It is not permissible to use E-Verify on current employees. That is a misuse of the service and not allowed. So CBSV is also virtually 100% accurate, where E-Verify pulls from multiple sources and currently still has a margin of error of about 8%. Here's a few case studies. This is a partial identity takeover. This gentleman is not 40 years old. But a 41-year-old convicted bank robber named Mandur Kamil obtained the personal identifiers of Donald Bren, who happens to be 79 years old in this picture. And by the way, a very rich man. He's a land developer in Southern California. So Kamil used a fake driver's license with Bren's name and Camille's picture, opened a bank account at East West Bank, deposited a federal tax return of nearly $1.4 million. Well, after a year, the law authorities finally caught up with the guy, but he had drained the account to where there was about $250,000 left in it. Here's the point. The bank was not using CBSV. If they had used CBSV, they would have seen the age discrepancy. A lot of negative publicity tarnishing the bank's reputation. Who wants to put money into a bank where $1 million is going out the back door? This was preventable with CBSV. This airport security supervisor was using a dead man's ID for 20 years. This is a remarkable story. A Nigerian named Bimbo was arrested in New Jersey for impersonating someone to hide his illegal immigrant status. This was at Liberty International, and for 20 years he had access to the tarmac and to sensitive data. He passed background checks by the Jersey State Police. He was using the name Jerry Thomas, a murder victim from New York City. Was this preventable? Of course. CBSV would have shown the SSN of a deceased person. Don't accept a new applicant until you know it's the right person. CBSV first, every time on every applicant. One last case. This thief lived 14 years with the stolen SSN of a 3-year-old boy. He purchased property, passed a criminal background check, acquired a passport. He was a sworn investigator of the Oregon Liquor Control Commission. The ID of Jason Robert Evers was stolen by Deutsche Crosstev. Nobody used CBSV on this guy. Of course, this would have been preventable. Now, by the way, kids are more likely, of course, to have their identity stolen than adults, because thieves could then use that stolen identity for a longer period of time. In fact, we encourage anyone on this call who has children or grandchildren to check the annual credit report of those kids. It's a free service from the Federal Trade Commission, annualcreditreport.com. There's no charge, because you might uncover, you know, that your 4-year-old has a loan or whatever. That's what thieves are doing. And you've seen those headlines. New ID theft targets kids' SSNs, could threaten credit system. Thieves are targeting kids' numbers. Hundreds of online businesses using computers to find dormant SSNs and selling those numbers. Well, how are they doing that? Unfortunately, it's way too easy, because SSNs are everywhere in all sorts of databases like banks, utilities, retail, education, government. They're in electronic devices. Hopefully no one on this call has their Social Security card on their person in case your wallet gets stolen. But SSNs are in the mail, they're in the trash can. So what does that mean? Well, this puts your company at risk because it's simple for thieves to ascertain SSN validity. There's websites that gather the results from algorithms and they publish this data right on the internet. Here's one, ssnvalidator.com. They are not affiliated with the federal government. What they do is they gather information. So we at random pick the number, we hit the search button, and presto, we just found a valid SSN issued in 1965 in Louisiana. This is a valid SSN of a living person. So I can pass myself as being born in 1965. So I combine my name, my address, my date of birth with this valid SSN, and presto, I've just created synthetic identity theft or synthetic name fraud. It's partial matching of PII, SSN name address combined with a fake DOB, or name DOB address with a stolen SSN. It creates a synthetic identity, a credit subprofile hidden from the main file. Unfortunately, it's allowed to happen due to credit reporting agencies' flawed systems. So back to that thief who steals the kid's SSN, and they develop a synthetic identity of an adult that they can use for many years. You're vulnerable to this type of fraud called SIT. Synthetic identity theft accounts for 90% of ID thefts. So instead of that applicant coming to you with their normal pattern, their own PII, now there's that blended suspicious pattern, a little bit, a little bit the right person and a little bit the crook. A little bit them, a little bit you. But here's the elephant in the room. I'd really be curious if anyone on this call has ever heard of CPN. And maybe if you have, you can just type yes, the word yes in the chat window. Most people have never heard of CPN, but here's what you're up against. This is what thieves are doing with their stolen items. They're rebranding them and they're selling them. Thieves have renamed stolen SSNs and they are now calling them credit profile numbers or credit privacy numbers, CPN. How big and how bad is this? Well, back in 2012, we went to Craigslist and we found, believe it or not, 538 people selling stolen SSNs all across the country, from Florida, bad credit, need a new start, Texas, no money down, Georgia, $25 for a stolen SSN and directions for creating a new credit file. What a deal. All across the country. But guess what happened 4 years later? It has exploded. There are now over 10,000 people on Craigslist alone selling stolen SSNs. That's almost an 1,800% increase in stolen SSNs in just 3 or 4 years. Again, all across the country. Change your life, change your identity. We provide low-cost file for all. How about this? Now they're including trade lines. Well, we all have trade lines associated with our credit file. That would be your credit card, your mortgage, legitimate things like that, legitimate businesses that you are paying. But now these guys are giving fictitious business trade lines. So these are fictitious businesses that they make up, and they'll say, oh yeah, Jerry's been paying early for 15 years. So Jerry ends up with a credit score of like 800. This is bad news. Here's a real Craigslist ad. They say start a new profile at the bureaus with our CPN number. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, no one is allowed to start a profile on themselves. They give you good, valid ones. They, SSN validator. They see if they're legit and not deceased. There's those trade lines, $150, false businesses to prop up your stolen SSN. And of course, they want you to resell them for them. Please don't do that. It's a federal offense. But of course, it passes all alerts. It passes that SSN trace because it's a valid SSN. It's stolen, but it's valid. This website called legalcpn.com says that you can create a new credit profile legally. That is a bold-faced lie. This is a federal offense. They want to change your name, give you fictitious business trade lines, and again, end up with a great credit score. So if someone's credit is in the tank, why not give this a shot and then apply for a job with you? And you would never know. if you're not using CBSV. Here's one slide on compliance. Some of you on this call might be involved on the compliance side of things as well. This is the preeminent tool strengthening your compliance policies, because we know you jump through a lot of hoops, including red flags, Dodd-Frank, Patriot Act, CFPB, and others. So CBSV is a great help to you. At this point, Jerry, we can open up to questions and answers.
Excellent, Chuck. Thanks. Let me hang on just a second. Let me glance at the control panel. We'll see if anybody's thrown anything at us. You were so thorough on all that I don't know that there's going to really be too much. I have just a couple things I'll touch on here in just a second. You know, there's not. So I'm going to touch on just a couple of things to add into what Chuck said just a little bit, just because I know how we present the differences in CBSV and the Social Security number trace to the client base. So right now, I'd say there's 90% of our client base across the country that's doing social traces. There's probably a lesser percentage that's doing CBSV. I really want to touch a little bit deeper on the differences, just so that people have that clear in their minds. So we target the social trace, and as TruDiligence, we market the background check process with the social trace paired with a criminal history in most cases. And anybody on the call that's talked to me or any of our people about this in the past has heard this spiel, and that is that the Social Security number trace, as we run it, is not validating ownership nor identity of really the person that is the true Social Security number holder, right? What it's doing is it is validating usage history in the way that that Social Security number has been used, okay? So it's, as Chuck alluded to, it's not a great identity validator or fraud mitigator. What it is a great tool to help us make sure that we understand how that applicant's Social Security number, or at least the Social Security number they've provided, has been used, and where it's been used, and in under what names it's been used, right? And so we use that as a roadmap to make sure, there you go, Chuck, thanks. We use that as a roadmap to make sure that we are most likely running criminal records in the right jurisdictions under any possible known aliases that have been used with that Social Security number. And honestly, that's by design, right? So the social trace, in some ways, we don't care who it was issued to when we run the Social Security number trace, because we want to see the fraudulent usage of that Social Security number. We want to see where it's been used. We want to see under what names it's been used. And so when we pair that with our criminal record search that we're otherwise running, it's a great tool in that respect in helping us develop that roadmap of where we're going to run somebody's criminal records at, right? Now let's compare that to CBSV and all the advantages of CBSV that Chuck has told us about. The biggest difference with that, to boil it down, is that CBSV does not show us any usage history. It does not show us any names. It doesn't show us any aliases. These all sound like bad things. That's not the way that I want to present it. What CBSV does do, stronger than anything else that's out there, and is the only tool that will do that, as Chuck has said, is validate direct legitimacy, issuance, and ownership of that Social Security number to your applicant directly. And it comes back with, directly out of Social Security Administration resources, it comes back directly with a yes, this is this person's Social Security number as issued by the administration based on what we provided them as search criteria, or no, it is not. And so it is the granddaddy of ownership, true ownership and legitimacy validation on the Social Security number. And Chuck, feel free to chime in if there's anything else you want to add to that, but I just know that we present the social trace as a broad search tool to help identify names, addresses, and help us drive criminal record searches, whereas CBSV obviously is completely different from that. So in a person's mind, they can help draw that distinction, and you can see how they really, in some ways, can companion one another in a pre-screen situation. CBSV would give us the ability to validate ownership, that we're dealing with somebody with a valid Social Security number that's been issued by the Social Security Administration, and then we look to the social trace as the potential option for developing the roadmap for criminal record searches. And in an ideal world, that is what we would be looking for.
Yeah, that's great, Jerry. And in fact, I just thought of this too, and I had neglected to mention, and I'm sure everyone on this call has seen where an applicant, I call him Fred Flintstone. Okay, Fred has several SSNs. Well, that's not possible, so there's a red flag, right? Something's wrong there. Or how about this? So that you see a Social Security number, but it comes back with 3 different names or 2 different names. There's actually, you know, what happens there, there's been, you know, we follow these things, of course. I mean, we've heard of sometimes the same SSN has been used 42, 43, 44 times. Because why? The cousin is passing it to along down the relative line, you know, because someone needs an SSN. So you've seen those things, right, Jerry?
We see it all the time. We take calls daily from people wanting an explanation as to why somebody else's name shows underneath their applicant's Social Security number. And those are the instances where CBSV is really the ultimate tool to help us identify that. And you know, as you touched on, it will help us validate that ownership and that validity of the Social Security number. Absolutely.
Yeah. Now the one nice thing, there's one other point. SSN Trace does provide address history, and CBSV does not. But you know, so yeah, and you had mentioned that it's a great complement. Some of your clients would love to do both services together because it's a great 1-2 punch.
And honestly, most that we have running CBSV currently are doing that. You know, they're running, and that's not meant to be an upsell. It's just the frank truth that most are running CBSV and a social trace, only because they complement one another, and they really serve separate but in some ways combined purpose. Absolutely.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
Yep. Yeah, we see that all the time. Yeah, that's a great use of the service.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Well, cool. Well, this is running a little shorter than I originally expected, but I think everybody appreciates that in terms of the time. It's now 2:35. Do you have anything else to add, Chuck, before I close with a couple of comments?
No, I just hopefully the audience, Jerry, they can sense the passion that we have about this service, how vital and important it is, because it really will weed out the bad employees that should not be there, that are unauthorized. It will thwart any future candidates that try to slip through the cracks. And again, if you don't mind, Jerry, helping your clients out for them to use it other ways, because now they learn they can use this for any business purpose, well, maybe they've come up with another way to use CBSV that would benefit their business, and you can help them that way too.
Absolutely. We'll be happy to consult with them on them at that level. So with that said, I'll say thank you very much to Chuck and Tony for their expertise in this, and Chuck, fantastic presentation. We really appreciate it. For everybody on the call, we have recorded the webinar, and we are going to lay it in the webinar library on the knowledge base. That will happen sometime in the next 24 hours. And so if you have colleagues that would have liked to have sit in on the call but weren't able to attend, or others in your organization that you feel like could benefit from it, we will have that recording available. If you have any questions about where to find that, feel free to reach out to your support agent here at TruDiligence, and we'll be very happy to direct that to you. So as I mentioned early on, we intend for this to be the first of an ongoing series of educational webinars, and the next one that we are planning is going to talk specifically about the adverse action process. If there's one thing that we probably take more calls on and ask for more consulting on than anything, it's probably the adverse action processes as outlined in the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So we are fervently working on a webinar in the background for that, and so that is our projection for next month's topic, will be adverse action processes. So I'll encourage everybody to keep an eye out for the invitation on that next webinar. And Chuck, I'll say thank you to you one more time, and thank you to everybody for joining us.
We're honored to be part of the presentation. Thank you so much, Jerry.
Great. Okay, thank you, Chuck. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye now.